She crossed 2,000 miles to escape the man who had bought her. The letter from the mountain said one husband. There were three brothers waiting at the stagecoach. By nightfall, she would learn that the man she fled had already crossed the Mississippi behind her with gold in his pocket and a quiet, patient hand that did not stop reaching until the thing he reached for was either his or destroyed. This is the story of Amelia Whitfield and the brass key she was given before she ever walked through the door. The stagecoach door swung open with a sound that did not belong to civilization. It was the sound of dry wood splitting in cold air, of rusted iron crying out against itself, of a thing that had carried too many people too far for too long. Amelia Whitfield sat very still inside that coach, her gloved hands folded in her lap, her spine straight as a Sunday hymnal, her breath held as though letting it out would somehow break the thin shell of courage she had built around herself across 2,000 miles. The driver cleared his throat above her. He did not look down into the coach. He did not have to. He had carried enough women west to know what they looked like in their first moment of arrival. He knew the silence. He knew the held breath. He knew the way they stared at the floorboards, as if the wooden planks of the coach floor could somehow protect them from whatever waited outside. "Miss," he said, "this is Silver Pine, end of the line." Amelia did not move. The wind outside pressed against the coach with a slow, patient hand. She could hear horses somewhere. She could hear voices. She could hear the small, dry sound of dust moving across packed earth. She could hear nothing that sounded like a town. There were no church bells. There were no carriage wheels on cobblestones. There was no street vendor calling out the price of bread. There was only wind and horses and the long silence of mountains. She closed her eyes for one heartbeat. She thought of her father. She thought of his hands when he was still strong enough to hold a pen. She thought of the small house in Boston with the green shutters and the brass knocker shaped like a lion. She thought of her mother long gone and the lavender soap her mother had loved. She thought of all the things she had left behind, and she understood in that one heartbeat that she could not go back. There was no back. There was only forward into whatever waited beyond the coach door. She opened her eyes. She gathered her carpet bag in her lap. She adjusted the small lace at her cuffs, an old Boston habit, the kind of small, useless gesture that served no purpose except to remind a woman that she was still herself. Then she leaned forward and stepped down from the coach into the town that was supposed to be the rest of her life. The town was not a town. It was four buildings that had agreed to stand near each other for the sake of company. There was a saloon with a faded sign. There was a general store with a man sitting on the porch carving something out of pine. There was a small wooden building that might have been a courthouse or might have been a barn, depending on which day you asked. And there was a hitching post where horses stood with steam rising from their backs in the cold autumn air. By that hitching post stood three men. Amelia saw them, and her heart performed the strange small lurch of an animal recognizing a predator before its mind has caught up. Three men, not one. The letter had said one man. The letter had been written in a careful, steady hand and signed simply S. Caldwell, and it had said one man, but there were three. And as Amelia stood there with her carpet bag in her hand and her boots in the dust of Silver Pine, she understood that the letter had told the truth and a lie at the same time, and she did not yet know which parts were which. The three men were the same, not similar, not alike, the same. The same height, which was tall enough to make Amelia tilt her chin to find their faces. The same broad shoulders that filled out the same heavy wool coats. The same dark hair, though one wore his tied back and one wore his loose and one wore his under a battered hat. The same strong jaw, the same straight nose, the same way of standing weight settled on the back foot, hands easy at the sides, the easy stillness of men who had spent so much of their lives waiting that waiting had become a kind of work. But their eyes were not the same. The man on the left had eyes the color of a coming storm gray, with something darker moving underneath. The man on the right had eyes of a softer blue, the blue of mountain shadows just before dawn. And the man in the middle, the one who stepped forward first, the one who lifted his hat with a slow, careful hand, as if Amelia were a thing that might startle and bolt, the man in the middle had eyes the color of whiskey held up to firelight, amber, warm, and tired in a way that ran all the way to the bottom of him. Miss Whitfield, the middleman said. His voice was deep and quiet. It was the voice of a man who did not waste words because he had spent enough years alone to learn what words cost. I am Silas Caldwell, he said. These are my brothers. Wyatt on my right hand, Ezra on my left. Amelia could not speak. She tried. She felt the words gather in her throat. She felt the small, careful sentences she had practiced on the train, on the second train, on the third train, in the back of every wagon, in every roadside inn, where she had slept with her hand on the carpet bag and her mother's pearl earrings tucked inside her boot. She had practiced what she would say to the man who had written her the letter. But the letter had said one man, and there were three. Wyatt, the one on the right, the one with the storm gray eyes, smiled. It was a slow smile. It was not a kind smile, and it was not a cruel smile. It was the smile of a man who had seen a great many things and had decided long ago that most of them were funny if you looked at them sideways. Easy now, darling, Wyatt said. None of us bite unless you ask real nice. Silas turned his head a quarter inch toward his brother and gave him a look that Amelia did not understand, but that Wyatt seemed to understand entirely, because Wyatt closed his mouth and looked down at his boots with something very close to a chastened grin. The third brother, Ezra, the quiet one with the dawn blue eyes, looked at the dust as though he wished the dust would swallow him. His ears were red. Amelia saw it and almost laughed. The almost laugh was the first thing that had moved in her chest in a long time. It surprised her. It came up from somewhere deep, from a place she had thought was sealed shut, and it broke against the back of her teeth like a small wave breaking on a dry shore. She did not let it out, but she felt it, and Silas saw her feel it, and something in his amber eyes shifted by the smallest possible degree. Miss Whitfield, Silas said again, and this time his voice was even quieter than before. You have come a very long way. We have a wagon. We have food at the homestead. We have a bed that is yours and yours alone. There is a great deal to discuss, but it does not need to be discussed standing in the wind. Will you come with us? It was not a question shaped like a question. It was not a command either. It was a door held open for a woman to walk through if she chose, and she felt the weight of the choice settle on her shoulders, and she knew with a small, clear certainty that this man, whoever he truly was, had spent a great deal of effort building that door for her. I will come, she said. Her voice surprised her. It sounded like her own voice. It sounded like the voice of the girl who had once played the piano in the parlor of the house with the green shutters. It sounded for one short moment like the voice of someone who had not yet been broken. She had not heard that voice in 11 months. Silas nodded once. He did not smile. He did not reach for her hand. He stepped back to give her room, and he gestured to the wagon waiting beyond the hitching post. And Wyatt moved at the same time, smooth as a shadow, and lifted her trunk from the back of the stagecoach, with one hand the way a smaller man might lift a hat box. Ezra came forward with his hat in his hands and his eyes still on the ground, and he said very softly, May I take your carpet bag, ma'am? And Amelia gave it to him because his voice was the voice of a boy, and because she could not have refused that voice if her life depended on it. They walked her to the wagon. They helped her up. Silas climbed onto the bench beside her, leaving a careful hand's width of space between them. Wyatt swung up to drive. Ezra rode behind on a tall sorrel mare, and the sorrel mare snorted once and tossed her head, and Ezra spoke to her in a low, gentle voice that Amelia could not hear, but that the mare seemed to understand entirely. The wagon pulled away from Silver Pine. The mountains rose around them as they climbed. For the first hour, no one spoke. Amelia watched the country open and then close around her the way a great green hand might open and close. The aspens were turning. The whole hillside on the western side of the road burned with a yellow so bright that her eyes ached looking at it. Pine trees stood in dark companies along the ridges. A creek ran beside the road for a long stretch. then turned away, then came back, then turned away again, as though the creek were a friend who could not quite decide whether to walk with them or walk alone. Above it all, the sky was the color of polished iron, and somewhere in the distance, very far off, she could see a wall of white that meant snow on the high peaks, even though it was only the first week of October. "You have not seen mountains before," Silas said. It was not a question. "I have seen hills," Amelia said. "We had hills in Massachusetts. They are not the same thing." "No, ma'am," Silas said. "They are not." A small silence passed. "I should tell you," Silas said, and his voice was careful in the way a man's voice is careful when he is trying not to frighten a horse, "that what I wrote in the letter is true. All of it. There is a homestead, there is land, there is work, and there is food, and there is a roof. What the letter did not tell you is the shape of the household. I did not write it because I could not be sure you would come if I did. I owe you the truth of it now before you set foot on our porch." Amelia kept her hands folded in her lap. She kept her eyes on the road ahead. She felt Wyatt listening from the driver's bench, though he made no sign of it. She felt Ezra listening from behind, though he rode a careful 3 lengths back. "Tell me," she said. "The homestead is mine," Silas said. "The land deed is in my name. The legal arrangement, the marriage we contract, will be between you and me alone. That part of the letter was true. I am the man who wrote to you. I am the man who will stand with you for the judge in Silver Pine when the time comes. But the homestead is also my brother's home. We were born there. We buried our parents there. We have worked that land together for nearly 20 years. And we have agreed, the 3 of us, that whatever woman comes to share that land with one of us shares the protection of all of us. There will be no question of any of that protection extending past a brother's place. Wyatt and Ezra will be your kin, Miss Whitfield. They will not be your husbands. That line is drawn and it will not be crossed." He paused. He looked at his hands on his knees. He spoke the next words with the quiet weight of a man who had rehearsed them in his head for many nights. "You will have your own room," he said. "You will have a key. The key will have no copy. The door will have a bolt on the inside. I will not enter that room unless you ask me to. Wyatt and Ezra will not enter that room ever. If you decide after a fair time of looking that you do not want this life, I will pay your way back to Boston myself. There will be no debt and no obligation. You owe us nothing, Miss Whitfield. You did not buy your passage with a promise. You bought it with your courage. That is more than enough for me." Amelia did not speak for a long time after that. She watched a hawk circle very high above a stand of yellow aspen. She watched the hawk's shadow run across the pale grass below. She thought of the night Cornelius had struck her with the carved handle of his umbrella, and the way the bruise had bloomed along her temple over the following 3 days, going from red to purple to yellow to nothing at all, except that it had not gone to nothing at all, because every time she touched her own face for a month afterward, she could feel the place where the bruise had been like a small, dark stone buried just beneath the skin. She thought of the night Augustus Beaumont had come to dinner and laid his soft, pale hand on her wrist and held it there too long while Cornelius watched and smiled. She thought of the moment 2 weeks later when she had taken the last of her mother's coins out from beneath the loose floorboard in her bedroom and counted them 3 times and known with a cold, clear certainty that there was just enough for the train. She thought of all those things, and then she put them down. She put them down in the bottom of the wagon, in the dust at her feet, in the long road behind them. She did not yet know whether she could leave them there forever, but she could leave them there for the rest of the afternoon. "Mr. Caldwell," she said. "Silas," he said quietly. "If it pleases you, Silas," she said. "The arrangement you describe is uncommon. You know that, I know it. It will be talked about." "It is already talked about," Silas said. "There is no helping that. The town will say what the town will say. The mountain will say nothing, which is its great virtue. The mountain will say nothing." Wyatt laughed once from the driver's bench. It was a short, surprised sound, as if he had not expected to find the line funny. but had found it funny anyway. Ezra behind made no sound at all, but Amelia felt him smile. She did not know how she knew. She knew. I accept the arrangement, she said. Silas did not turn to look at her. He kept his amber eyes on the road and the slow ears of the team. But she saw his shoulders ease by the smallest measure, and she understood that he had been carrying her possible refusal as a kind of weight, and that the weight had been heavier than he had let himself admit. Thank you, ma'am, he said. Amelia, she said. He turned then, just his face, just for one quiet moment. The amber of his eyes caught the sideways autumn light, and for a heartbeat, she thought of the lamp her father had kept on his desk, the small brass one with the green glass shade, and the way the light had pooled on his papers in the long evenings of her childhood. Amelia, he said. The wagon climbed. They came over a low ridge in the early afternoon, and the country fell away below them into a long green bowl held in the curved hands of two ridges. A creek shone at the bottom of the bowl. A cabin stood at the near end of the bowl, low and broad and dark with age, with smoke rising from a stone chimney in a thin, straight line. A barn stood to one side of the cabin. A round corral stood beyond the barn. A small herd of cattle moved like slow brown stones across the far meadow. A flock of sheep, smaller and wider, moved together in the way sheep move, which is the way a single mind in many bodies moves. This is Hawk's Hollow, Silas said. He said it the way a man says the name of a person he loves. Amelia looked at the cabin and the barn and the corral and the cattle and the sheep and the creek and the long green bowl and the ridges holding it and the high white peaks above the ridges holding it all, and she felt something very small and very quiet shift inside her chest, the way a stone shifts in a stream bed when the water finally finds the angle that will move it. It is beautiful, she said. It is hard, Silas said. But yes, it is also that. They went down the long slope into the bowl. Wyatt drove the team with the easy hand of a man who had driven that road in the dark, in the rain, in the snow, in every season for more years than he could count. Ezra rode ahead now and opened the gate. The team passed through. Ezra closed the gate behind them. They came down the last quarter mile and pulled up at the cabin, and Amelia sat for one moment Mario on the bench beside Silas Caldwell. And then she stood and let him hand her down, and her boots touched the dirt of the dooryard, and she was home, though she did not yet know she was home and would not know it for a long time yet. The cabin had been built by men who knew wood the way other men know wives. The logs were Engelmann spruce, peeled and notched, and fitted together with the patience of a craft that does not hurry. The chinking between the logs was packed tight and recent, a darker color than the gray of the wood, which told Amelia that someone had done the work that very fall before the snow came. The roof was shingled in cedar, weathered to a soft silver. The porch ran the full length of the front of the cabin, broad and deep, with two rocking chairs at one end and a long bench at the other, and a small, careful row of empty boots beside the door. 3 pairs in 3 sizes that were nearly but not quite the same. Inside the cabin opened into a single great room with a kitchen at one end and a stone hearth at the other, and a long plank table down the middle. The hearth was the size of a small wagon. A fire was burning in it. Above the hearth ran a long mantel of polished cottonwood, and on the mantel stood 3 things only: a small framed photograph of a man and a woman in old-fashioned clothes faded almost to gray, a clay jar with a blue rim, and a single carved wooden bird the size of a child's fist, carved so fine that Amelia could see the individual feathers along the small folded wings. She stopped in front of the bird. Ezra made it, Silas said behind her, when he was 12. Amelia did not touch the bird. She wanted to. She did not. A door stood open at the back of the cabin. Through it, she could see a hallway with 3 doors along it. Silas led her down the hallway. He stopped at the door at the end. He pushed it open and stepped back so that she could enter the room first. It was a small room. It had a window that looked out over the creek. It had a narrow bed neatly made with a quilt of blue and white squares. It had a small writing desk. It had a wash basin on a stand. It had a single straight chair. It had a small braided rug on the floor by the bed. And on the desk set neatly in the exact center lay three things: a brass key, a slim leather-bound book, and a single dried wildflower pressed between two thin sheets of paper. Amelia walked to the desk. She stood looking at the three things for a long moment. Then she lifted the key. It was warm from the sun coming through the window. The metal was heavier than she had expected. She turned it in her hand and saw the small marks of the file where Ezra had cut it. "The bolt is on the inside," Silas said from the doorway. "The lock fits the key. There is no other key. I had Ezra make it last month when your last letter came. I figured you might want it." Amelia closed her hand around the key. She did not let him see her face. She did not yet know what was on her face, but she knew it was not a thing she could let a stranger see, even a stranger who had carved her a key with his own brother's hands and laid it on a desk beside a pressed wildflower. "Thank you," she said. She kept her back to him. Silas stood for one heartbeat in the doorway. Then he stepped back. "I will be in the barn," he said. "Wyatt is starting the supper. Ezra will be near if you need anything." "Take the time you need, ma'am." "Amelia," she said quietly, still not turning. "Amelia," he said. His boots moved away down the hall. She heard them cross the great room. She heard the door of the cabin open and shut. She heard very faintly the sound of a man crossing a dooryard toward a barn, and the small distant complaint of a cow somewhere, and the closer clink of a pot lid being set on iron in the kitchen. Then she was alone in the room with the key and the book and the wildflower. She sat down on the edge of the bed. She did not cry. She had not cried in almost a year. She had decided a long time ago that crying was a thing other women did. Women who still believed weeping would change a thing. She did not cry, but she sat for a long time on the edge of that quilt with the key warm in her hand and the autumn light slanting through the window across the small braided rug, and she thought of her father. And she thought of her mother, and she thought of the green shutters, and she thought of the man with the amber eyes who had built a door she could close and locked it from the inside before she ever arrived. After a while she rose, she crossed to the desk. She picked up the slim leather book. She opened it. It was a book of poems, Walt Whitman, Leaves of Grass. The pages were soft with handling. Someone had read this book a great many times. On the inside front cover in a small, careful hand was written one line: "For the woman who comes to the mountain. Some words travel better in company. E.C." Amelia closed the book. She closed her eyes. She held the book against her chest with both hands. Then she opened her eyes and she crossed to the door and she slid the bolt closed and she stood with her forehead against the wood and she let one breath out and the breath shook on the way out. And she put her hand flat against the door and she said one word very softly to no one and to everyone. "Home," she said. She did not yet believe it. She did not yet know if she could believe it. But the word had come out of her mouth on its own the way a bird flies out of a long shut cage when the door is opened. Not because the bird trusts the open sky, but because the door is open and the bird remembers somewhere deep in its small, wild bones that it was made for sky. She stood there a long time. The cabin lived around her in small sounds: a pan on the stove, a man's low voice speaking to another man, the crackle of the hearth fire, the wind in the eaves, the far-off complaint of a cow. After a while, she crossed back to the bed. She unpinned her hat. She set it on the small chair. She sat down again with the book of poems in her lap and the brass key still in her hand. The autumn light moved slowly across the rug. The sun was beginning to go. There was a soft knock at her door. Not at the door of the room, at the front door of the cabin far down the hall. The knock was distant and small. She heard Wyatt cross to it. She heard him open it. She heard a voice she did not know, an older voice, a man's voice asking a question. She heard Wyatt answer in his easy, unhurried way. Then the door closed again and she heard Wyatt walk back to the kitchen, and there was a different quality to his step now. A tightness, the step of a man who has just been told a piece of news he does not like. She rose. She slid the bolt back. She opened her door. She walked down the hallway in her stockinged feet, carrying the brass key still in her hand. She came into the great room. Wyatt stood at the kitchen end of the long table. He had a wooden spoon in one hand. He set it down very carefully on the table, the way a man sets down a thing he is afraid he might otherwise throw. Ezra came in from the back porch and he saw Wyatt's face and he stopped. "What was it?" Ezra said. "Telegram," Wyatt said. "The boy from town rode up to bring it. He is gone now. He would not stay for coffee. He would not even come inside." Wyatt looked up. He saw Amelia standing in the hallway in her stocking feet with the brass key in her hand, and his eyes went very still, and Amelia understood before he said another word that the news was about her. "A man came into Silver Pine yesterday," Wyatt said. "A man in a dark coat. From back east. He has been asking the saloon keeper and the stage agent and the woman at the dry goods store whether a young woman with yellow hair has come through this town in the last 2 weeks. He has been offering coin for the answer. Mrs. Holloway sent the boy to tell us. She thought we would want to know." Amelia did not move. The key in her hand had gone very cold. "Did the man give a name?" Ezra said, his voice as steady as winter. "He did not need to give a name," Wyatt said. The boy heard his accent. The boy said, "The man talks like a Boston banker." Outside, the wind came down off the high country and pressed against the cabin walls. The fire in the great hearth shifted. A log fell and a small, bright cloud of sparks rose up the chimney, and somewhere in the dusk above the bowl of Hawk's Hollow, a single hawk cried once and was gone. Amelia stood very still in the doorway between the hall and the great room. She had crossed 2,000 miles. She had crossed 3 trains and 4 wagons and 1 stagecoach. She had climbed a mountain in a wagon driven by a man she had not met before sundown. She had unpinned her hat. She had laid down her carpet bag. She had spoken the word home to a closed door, and he had followed her here. She had known he would come. She had known it the way a woman knows the weather is turning, in the small bones of her wrists, in the place at the back of her neck where her mother used to braid her hair. She had known it, but she had hoped in the small, foolish, bird-shaped place inside her chest that the mountains would be too far. She had hoped that the road would be too long. She had hoped that the silence of these high, lonely places would simply swallow her the way the silence had swallowed so many others, and that he would lose her track and turn back and go home and choose another girl, any other girl, any girl who was not Amelia. He had not lost her track. The amber light of the dying afternoon came through the window over the kitchen sink and fell across the long plank table. Wyatt stood with his big calloused hand flat on the wood. Ezra stood in the back doorway with his dawn blue eyes on her face and his mouth a thin, steady line. The fire in the hearth murmured to itself like an old man telling a story to no one. "Mrs. Holloway," Wyatt said quietly, also said one more thing. He looked at Amelia. "She said the man asked specifically after a Miss Whitfield." Amelia closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she crossed the room. She crossed it slowly because she did not want to seem to be hurrying, and she did not want her knees to give out underneath her. She came to the long plank table. She set the brass key down on the wood very gently, as if it were a living thing she did not want to startle. She placed her hand flat beside it. She did not look up at Wyatt. She did not look up at Ezra. She looked at the brass key on the dark wood and at the small, clean shape of her own hand beside it, and she spoke. "His name is Augustus Beaumont," she said. "He bought me from my uncle 11 months ago for $5,000 in gold. The uncle is a preacher in Boston. The preacher owes a great deal of money to a great many men. Mr. Beaumont was the answer to the preacher's debts. I was the price. I did not agree. I was struck for my disagreement. The bruise has faded, but the agreement has not been signed. I left Boston in the night with my mother's pearl earrings and what was left of her coin. I wrote to your brother under my own name because I am tired of hiding and because I did not want to come to a man under a lie. That is who I am. That is who is coming for me. I will understand if you put me on the wagon in the morning." A long silence followed. Then Wyatt very quietly picked up the wooden spoon from the table. He turned. He set it back into the iron pot on the stove. He stirred the pot once, twice, three times. He set the spoon down again. He turned back to face her. His storm gray eyes had gone the particular color they went when the storm in them was not coming, but had already arrived. "We do not put kin on a wagon in the morning," Wyatt said. He said it as flatly as a man reads a brunt on a steer. Ezra crossed the room. He did not come too close. He stopped at a respectful distance. He spoke in his low, gentle boy's voice that was somehow also the voice of a man who had decided a thing and would not be moved off it. "You are kin, ma'am," he said. "You crossed our threshold. You took the key. You are kin under this roof until you yourself walk back out across the threshold and tell us otherwise. That is the way of this house. It was the way our mother taught us. It is not changing tonight." Behind them, the door of the cabin opened. Silas Caldwell came in. He had been in the barn, and he had a piece of leather harness in his hand that he had been mending, and there was straw on his sleeve, and the day's last light caught in his amber eyes, and he stopped just inside the door because he saw their three faces, and he set the harness very slowly on the bench by the door, and he straightened, and he looked at each of them in turn. "What happened?" he said. Wyatt told him. Silas did not interrupt. He did not move while Wyatt spoke. He stood in the doorway with his hat still on and the day's last light making a thin gold line along his shoulder. And when Wyatt was done speaking, Silas was quiet for the space of 3 breaths. Then he took off his hat. He set it on the peg by the door. He crossed the great room. He came to the long plank table and he stopped on the other side of it from Amelia, and he placed his own broad, calloused hand flat on the wood mirror to hers, the table between them, and the brass key between their 2 hands. "Amelia," he said. She made herself look up. His amber eyes were tired. His amber eyes had been tired since the moment she had first seen them in front of the saloon in Silver Pine. But under the tired, there was something else now, something that had not been there in the morning, something that had moved in close while she was unpinning her hat in the small back room. It was not anger, though there was anger in it. It was not pity, though there was something like sorrow in it. It was the steady, banked heat of a man who had decided a thing. "A Caldwell keeps his word," he said. He held her eyes. "I gave my word in a letter I wrote to a woman I had not met. The letter said she would have a home. The letter said she would have protection. The letter said she would have a key to her own door. I meant every word of it then. I mean every word of it now. The man coming up the road from Boston does not change the meaning of the letter. The man coming up the road from Boston only finds out when he gets here what the letter meant." Amelia's throat ached. She did not let it show. She had not cried in 11 months. She did not cry now, but she let her hand slide forward across the plank table, the smallest possible distance, and her fingertips touched the back of Silas Caldwell's hand, and they stood there like that, the 2 of them, with the brass key on the wood between their 2 hands, while outside the autumn light failed in the long bowl of Hawk's Hollow, and the high white peaks above turned the color of cold iron, and the first stars began to come out one by one above the pines. Behind her, Wyatt picked up the spoon and stirred the pot. Behind her, Ezra walked to the hearth and laid another log on the fire. The cabin lived. The mountain stood. The night came on. And somewhere far down on the long road that ran east toward Denver and beyond Denver toward the country she had crossed to flee, a man in a dark coat that did not belong west of the Mississippi was at that same moment counting his coin and asking his next question. And the question would have her name in it, and the answer would point him north. And the man would put away his coin and go back to the saloon at Silver Pine and order a glass of whiskey and pay for it with a piece of gold large enough to make the bartender's hand pause in midair, and the man would smile, and the smile would not reach his eyes, because the eyes of Augustus Beaumont had not reached a smile in many years, and would not reach one again before the snow fell on the high country of Colorado, and the bowl of Hawk's Hollow filled with the long white silence of winter, and the things that hide inside it. But Amelia Whitfield did not yet know any of that. She knew only the warmth of a man's hand under her fingertips and the weight of a brass key on dark wood and the murmur of a hearth fire and the smell of whatever was in the iron pot, which she now understood was elk stew, and the small, clean heartbeat of a thing she had not felt in a very long time, which was the small, clean heartbeat of hope. She lifted her hand from the back of Silas Caldwell's hand. She picked up the brass key. She closed her fingers around it. She looked across the table at the man who had carved a door for her before she ever walked through it, and she said in a voice that was steadier than she had thought her voice could ever be again, the words that would carry her into everything that came next. "I will not be put on a wagon in the morning," she said. "I have come too far to be put on a wagon. If he comes up this road, he will find me here. He will not find me alone." Silas Caldwell looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "No, ma'am," he said. "Tisha, he will not find you alone." Outside, the first true cold of the season slid down off the high peaks and into the bowl of Hawks Hollow, and the wind moved through the pines with the creaking, slow sound of a held breath, finally letting go, and the cabin stood and the fire burned, and the three brothers and the woman in the red traveling dress stood inside the warm yellow square of the great room, and the night came down on the mountain, and the man on the long road from Boston rode 1 mile closer in the dark. The morning came slow and gray to Hawks Hollow. Amelia woke before the sun. She lay for a long moment in the narrow bed under the blue and white quilt, and she listened. The cabin around her was quiet in a way that was not the quiet of an empty house. It was the quiet of a house that holds sleeping men and a banked fire and the small breathing things in the rafters, the quiet of a place that is alive but resting. She heard very faintly a man's slow breath coming through a wall. She heard the soft tick of cooling iron from the great hearth. She heard the wind moving along the eaves the way a hand moves along the back of an animal it knows. She rose. She dressed in her plainest dark wool. She braided her hair with cold fingers. She slid the bolt back on her door very slowly because she did not yet know which boards in the hallway would creak under her, and she did not want to wake them. She walked down the hall in stockinged feet with her boots in her hand. She came into the great room. The hearth fire had burned down to a slow red bed of coals. A pot of coffee sat on the iron crane pulled to the cool side, still warm. Someone had put it there for her. Someone had left a clean tin cup beside it on the hearthstones in a small folded square of brown paper next to the cup. And on the paper was written in the same careful hand that had signed her book of poems 3 words, "For Miss Amelia." She sat down on the bench by the hearth and she pulled on her boots and she poured the coffee into the tin cup and she held the cup with both hands and she drank, and the coffee was strong and bitter and good. And she sat there for a long time in the gray dawn while the fire shifted and the first thin daylight came in through the eastern window and made a long pale rectangle on the plank floor. When she rose to put the cup in the wash basin, Silas was standing in the kitchen doorway. He had come in from outside without making a sound. There was frost on the shoulders of his coat. He had a small armload of split kindling in the crook of his arm. He stopped when he saw her the way a man stops when he comes around a corner and finds a deer in the dooryard, careful not to startle the thing he has found. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she said. He set the kindling beside the hearth. He brushed the frost off his coat. He looked at her and at the empty cup in her hand and at the small folded square of paper still sitting on the hearthstone. "Ezra," he said quietly, "has been up since 4. I gathered," she said. Silas almost smiled. He almost. The corner of his mouth moved by the smallest possible measure, and then it stilled again, and Amelia thought that this was a man who had taught his face a long time ago not to give things away, and that the small movement at the corner of his mouth was the closest thing he had to laughter. "Wyatt is in the barn," Silas said. "I am going to ride the line of the south fence after breakfast. The first hard frost came in last night. I want to look at the creek crossings before the ice locks them. Ezra will be in the kitchen. He cooks the breakfast on Tuesdays. If you have a mind to learn the way of the kitchen here today is a fair morning to start. If you have not the mind, then the porch is yours, and the rocking chair and the coffee for as long as you wish." She thought about it. "I will go to the kitchen," she said. He nodded once. He did not say it pleased him. He did not need to. He picked up his hat from the peg by the door and he stepped back out into the gray dawn. And the cabin door closed behind him with the small, careful sound of a door closed by a man who had spent his life closing doors carefully so as not to disturb the things inside. Ezra was already at the stove when she came through. He had a long blue and white striped apron tied over his shirt. The sight of it did something strange in her chest. She had not expected in any of the futures she had imagined for herself on the long road west that the first morning of the rest of her life would begin with a 6-foot-tall mountain man in a striped apron standing at a cast iron stove, turning bacon with a long wooden fork. He looked up when she came in. His ears went red. He looked down again at the bacon. He cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said. "Amelia," she said. "Amelia," he said. "There is biscuit dough on the board if you have a hand for biscuits. There is no shame if you have not. Wyatt will eat anything, and I will eat what Wyatt eats, and Silas will eat what is put in front of him without comment, so the biscuit will not be judged." "I have a hand for biscuits," she said. She crossed to the board. She rolled up the cuffs of her sleeves. She put her hands into the flour and the cold lard and the buttermilk, and her hands remembered the work, even though the rest of her had not made a biscuit since the morning of her father's funeral. She worked the dough. She rolled it. She cut it with the rim of the tin cup she had drunk her coffee from. She laid the rounds in the iron pan. Ezra took the pan from her without speaking and set it in the oven of the stove and shut the oven door with a soft iron click. They worked side by side without speaking for a long while. After some minutes, Ezra said very quietly, "My mother used to say that the way a person makes biscuits tells you about the way the person was raised. She said you could see it in the hands, whether they were taught careful or whether they were taught hurried." "What did your mother say about your hands?" Amelia asked. Ezra smiled down at the bacon. "She said I had been taught careful," he said. "But she also said I had been taught careful by her, so she was bound to say so. She did not have the cleanest opinion in the matter." Amelia laughed. It was a small laugh, no more than a single soft sound, but it was the second laugh she had felt in a long, bitter year, and she heard it, and she was almost afraid of it, the way a person is almost afraid of a good thing they had thought was lost. Ezra heard it too. He did not turn. He did not make a sign, but his shoulders eased the smallest measure under the striped apron, and Amelia understood the way she had understood the day before in the wagon, that this brother was a man who heard the small things and who would never tell a soul what he had heard. When Wyatt came in from the barn, he stamped the cold off his boots in the doorway, and he hung his coat on the peg, and he looked at the kitchen with Ezra in the apron, and Amelia at the board with flour on her sleeves, and he stopped where he stood. "Well," he said. "Wyatt said, Ezra, I'm only saying," said Wyatt, "that this is the prettiest kitchen I have walked into in the entirety of my given life." The biscuit said, "Ezra will be ready in 8 minutes. Sit down or be of use. Those are your two options." Wyatt sat down. Silas came in 5 minutes later with the smell of cold stone and horses on him, and he stopped in the same place Wyatt had stopped, and he looked at the kitchen the same way Wyatt had looked, but Silas did not say anything at all. He only crossed to the wash basin and rolled up his sleeves and washed his hands very thoroughly and dried them on the rough towel by the basin. Then he came to the table and he pulled out a chair and he held the chair and he looked at Amelia. "Will you sit?" he said. She sat. He pushed the chair gently in behind her. Then he sat down across from her, and Wyatt sat down at the head of the table, and Ezra brought the food, and the four of them ate breakfast together for the first time, and for a few quiet minutes the room was only the sound of forks on tin plates, and the slow popping of the fire, and the wind moving somewhere far above the roof. So began the days at Hawks Hollow. The first week passed the way a good first week passes in a place a person is meant to be, which is to say it passed without seeming to pass at all. Amelia woke each morning to the cool gray dawn and the smell of wood smoke. She drank Ezra's coffee. She made biscuits. She washed plates. She swept the great room with a stiff broom of bound willow. She mended the long tear in the sleeve of Wyatt's heavy work coat without being asked, sitting by the hearth in the warm autumn evenings with the coat across her lap and her needle moving steady. And Wyatt, when she handed it back to him in the morning, looked at the seam for a long, quiet moment. And then he looked at her and he said, only Ma'am and Amelia understood from the way his voice went rough on that one word that no one had mended a coat for that man in a great many years. Silas taught her the weather. He took her out onto the porch on the third morning, and he stood with her for a long while and he pointed at the sky. That gray, he said, with the long, thin streaks running northwest, that is high, cold air moving in. That gray with the rounder shapes piled up like pulled wool, that is wet weather coming. The first will give you frost. The second will give you snow. You learn the difference here in the first year because the first will let you ride and the second will trap you in the cabin for 3 days. And a person who plans wrong on the wrong day has to spend 3 days regretting it. How do you tell it, she said, when both grays are in the sky at once? Then you go by the wind, he said. If the wind is from the north, you trust the cold. If the wind has any west in it, you trust the wet. If the wind dies altogether, you trust nothing. And you go inside because dead air on this mountain in October is the sky deciding what it wants to do, and it does not always decide kind. He was a careful teacher. He did not lecture. He spoke in short, clean sentences, and he waited for her to think, and he did not fill her silences with more words. He treated her, she came to understand exactly the way he had said he would treat her in the wagon on the way up. As kin, not as a child and not as a creature to be steered, but as a grown woman come into a country she did not know who had every right to learn the country at her own speed. Wyatt taught her the creek. He took her down to it on the fourth day with a small basket and a length of fine twine and a tin of waxed corks. He showed her how to read the slow water from the fast. He showed her where the cutthroat trout held in the deep places under the cut bank. He showed her where the cold air from the high country pooled along the creek bottom in the early hours, and how to walk in such a way that a person did not break the thin curl of frost on the willow tips, because the trout said Wyatt could feel a footstep in the willow root from 20 feet away, and a heavy-footed person was a hungry person on this creek. He did not, she noticed, treat her like a woman who could not stand a cold creek bank at dawn. He treated her like a person who had not yet learned this creek, but who was going to. There was a difference. She had not known until that fourth morning how badly she had needed the difference. It was on that fourth morning, walking back up from the creek with the basket between them, that Wyatt told her about the scar. Silas had come down to meet them at the lower gate, and he had walked ahead with the basket, and Amelia had hung back beside Wyatt for a moment, because there was a thing she had wanted to ask, but had not known how to ask. And Wyatt, without her saying a word, said it for her. You are looking at the scar on my brother's neck, he said. I have not asked him about it, she said. You will not need to, he said. He took it from a black bear when he was 19. The winter we lost our father. The bears were down out of the high country that year because there had been no acorns and no berries, and they were coming into the dooryards looking for anything warm enough to kill. Silas killed his bear. The bear marked him on the way out. The marking has stayed. Why did he never tell me, she said. Because telling a story, said Wyatt, is a thing my brother does not do for the sake of being known. He does it for the sake of teaching a thing, and the bear has nothing more to teach him. So he leaves the bear off the table. You will find that with him. He keeps the things that are still teaching him close. He sets the rest down. Amelia walked the rest of the way to the cabin with that in her ear, and she thought about it for a long time afterward, and she filed it away in the small, careful place inside her where she was beginning to keep the things she had learned about Silas Caldwell. Ezra taught her the horses. He took her to the corral at the far end of the barn on the fifth day. There were 6 horses in the Caldwell string. Jasper, the long-legged chestnut, who was Silas's. Smoke, a tall iron-gray mare, who watched everyone over the rail with a steady, patient eye, of a mother of sons. Whisper, a small mountain mare the color of mahogany, and three plow horses, two bay and one black, who stood together in the way of horses who have spent a great many years standing together. Whisper said, Ezra is the one you will ride, if you wish to ride. Amelia stood on the lower rail of the corral and she looked at the mare. Whisper looked back at her with an unhurried brown eye. I rode as a girl, she said. Not so much. Not for a long time. My father had a small chestnut gelding. He let me sit on him in the meadow behind our house. I do not remember much of the riding. I remember the smell of him. I remember the feel of his neck under my hand. Then you will remember the rest, said Ezra. Horses give you back what you gave them when you were a child. They do not forget you, even if you forgot you ever knew them. He brought her into the corral. He put a halter on Whisper without rope or hurry. He showed her how to stand at the mare's shoulder and how to lay a hand on the warm neck and how to breathe slow so that the mare's breath came down to match her own. He did not put her on the horse that day. He did not put her on the horse until the 8th day. By then, Whisper followed her along the rail without a halter at all, and Amelia stood in the dust of the corral with her hand on the mare's mane, and she thought for the smallest fraction of a moment that she had been someone else once a long time ago, and that the someone else was beginning to come back the way a person comes back from a far journey, slowly in pieces without quite noticing the moment of arrival. You're home now, darling, said Ezra one evening very quietly when he passed her in the kitchen and saw the look that had been growing in her face all week. Even if I do not yet feel it, she said. Even if you do not yet feel it, he said. The days went. The mornings were colder. The aspens lost their leaves 3 days in a row in a long yellow rain that covered the ground around the cabin in a soft yellow carpet that crackled under the boots of the men when they walked. The cattle moved down out of the high meadow on their own, drifting along the creek toward the home pasture, the way cattle do when they feel the season turning under their hooves. Wyatt and Silas rode out one cold blue morning and brought back a young elk on a pack horse. Ezra hung it in the smokehouse and butchered it with the long, careful hands of a man who had butchered a great many elk and respected each one. The smell of wood smoke and sage and slow roasting meat hung over Hawk's Hollow for 3 days, and Amelia learned to make cornbread in a heavy iron skillet, and she learned to roll out pie dough on a marble slab Ezra brought down from a high shelf for her, and she learned to fold a wool blanket the Caldwell way, which was a particular way that involved a half turn at the second fold, and that none of the brothers could quite explain except to say that their mother had folded blankets that way, and so they did too. On the 9th day, Silas came in from the barn at midday with a small parcel wrapped in oilcloth. He set the parcel on the long plank table. For you, he said. Amelia opened it. Inside the oilcloth lay a pair of sturdy leather gloves. They were woman's gloves, well-made, lined with soft sheepskin, the leather oiled to a dark, warm color. Inside one of the gloves, tucked down into the wrist, was a slip of paper. Amelia drew it out. On the paper in Silas's hand was written one line. A woman who lives on this mountain needs her own gloves. Made by Ezra, sized by Wyatt, paid for by Silas. Welcome. Amelia stood very still with the gloves in her hands. She did not let them see her face. She turned away on the small pretense of folding the oilcloth, and she folded it slowly, and she folded it twice more than was needed. And by the time she turned back, her face was the face she had worn since Boston, which was the face of a woman who did not allow herself to be moved by small kindnesses, because she had learned that small kindnesses were the most dangerous kind, the kind that opened doors a person could not afterward close. Thank you, she said. Wyatt, leaning in the kitchen doorway with a cup of coffee in his hand, watched her from under the brim of his hat. He did not say anything, but the gray of his eyes held on her face for one long moment before he looked away, and Amelia understood that this brother saw a great deal more than he let on, and that he had seen exactly what was happening in her chest, and that he had decided in his own way to let her keep it private. That night by the hearth, Ezra read aloud. It became without anyone having decided it the way the evenings would go. Silas mended harness on the bench by the hearth. Wyatt cleaned and oiled rifles at the long table, working slowly the way a man works, who was letting the work fill the time rather than the time fill the work. Ezra read from the small leather book of Whitman's poems. Amelia sat in the rocking chair with her mending in her thumb, and she listened to the rise and fall of Ezra's voice, and the words moved through the warm room like slow water moving through a meadow, and the wind pressed quietly against the cabin walls, and the fire shifted and settled, and the cabin held its small bright square of yellow light in the great dark bowl of Hawk's Hollow, under the cold stars, and Amelia understood in those evenings that she was being given something she did not have a name for and might never have a name for, and that the not having a name for it did not make it less. On the 11th evening, the trouble began. It began small, as serious troubles often do. Ezra came in from the barn at supper time carrying his fiddle, and his face had that particular tightness in it that Amelia had learned by now to read the tightness Ezra's face wore when he had heard a thing he did not yet wish to repeat. He set the fiddle down on the bench by the door. He looked at Silas. He looked at Wyatt. He did not look at Amelia. "What is it?" said Silas. "Hank Riley rode up to the lower gate," said Ezra. "He did not come in. He just sat his horse and waited until I rode down. He said Mrs. Holloway sent him. He said the man in the dark coat is still in Silver Pine. He has been in Silver Pine for 10 days. He has been buying drinks for any man who will sit with him. He has been asking after the road that leads up here. Riley said the man bought him a whiskey 2 nights ago and asked him whether the wagon track at the Third Creek Crossing was passable in October and whether the Caldwell place was the only homestead at the end of it." "What did Riley tell him?" said Wyatt. "Riley said he told the man that the wagon track turned bad after the second crossing and that the Caldwell place was nothing worth riding to in October. Riley said he is a poor liar. He said the man smiled at him in a way that told him the man had not been fooled." The fire shifted in the hearth. Outside, the wind had risen during supper, and it pressed against the cabin walls now with a thicker, harder hand than it had pressed all week. Amelia set her fork down very carefully on the rim of her tin plate. She folded her napkin. She placed it beside the plate. She made her hands stop where she had placed them. "He has not come up the road yet," she said. "No," said Silas. "He has not. He is waiting for something." "He is waiting for the snow," said Wyatt. She turned to him. "The snow," she said. Wyatt set his coffee cup down. He looked across the table at her with the gray eyes that had been clear all week but had gone heavy, now the eyes of a man who had stopped waiting for the storm because the storm had arrived. "The road from Silver Pine up to Hawk's Hollow," he said, "is a fair road for a wagon when the ground is dry. It is a fair road for a horse when the ground is muddy. It is no road at all when the snow comes. The Third Creek Crossing freezes solid at the edges and runs hard and black down the middle, and a horse that puts a foot in the wrong place at the third crossing in November is a dead horse and a dead rider behind it. A man from Boston who has never seen the third crossing does not know that. But a man from Boston who has spent 10 days buying whiskey for the men of Silver Pine has been told it. He is not waiting for the road to be hard. He is waiting for the road to be impossible, because he knows that once the snow closes, the road no marshal rides up here, no neighbor rides up here, no help comes up here, and whatever he means to do at this end of the road, he does it without any witnesses but us." Amelia sat very still. "So he means to come," she said. Wyatt did not soften it. "He means to come," he said. Silas had not spoken during any of this. He was sitting with his hands folded together on the table, and he was looking at his hands the way a man looks at his hands when he is thinking through a long, careful chain of consequences. Amelia watched him. She watched the fire shift on the side of his weathered face. She watched the small line of the old scar that ran from his jaw down the side of his neck and disappeared into the collar of his shirt, the scar Wyatt had told her about at the lower gate on the fourth morning. She knew the bear now. She knew the winter. She did not need to ask. After a long while, Silas spoke. He spoke without looking up from his hands. We have 10 days, he said, maybe 12, maybe 2 weeks if the weather holds. The first hard snow will close the third crossing. Once the third crossing is closed, the road is closed. Anyone riding up the road after that is riding it knowing he is riding it. He is riding it for one purpose. We will not be wrong about his purpose when he comes. He raised his head then. He looked across the table at Amelia. I gave my word, he said quietly, that you would have a key to your own door. I gave my word that you would have protection. I gave it in a letter, and I gave it in a wagon, and I gave it standing in this room. I am giving it again now. The man on the road from Boston does not change my word. He only finds out when he gets here what my word is made of. A Caldwell keeps his word, said Wyatt softly from the head of the table. A Caldwell keeps his word, said Ezra from the bench by the door where he had picked his fiddle up again without playing it. Amelia looked from one to the other. She looked at Silas last. You do not owe me this, she said. Any of you. I came up your road as a stranger 11 days ago. You have given me a roof and a key and a pair of gloves and a horse to learn and a book to read. You do not owe me a fight. There is still time. He has not yet seen me. If I leave now before the snow closes the road, he will lose my track at Silver Pine, and you three will be free of me, and your mountain will be the same mountain it has been all your lives. Silas looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something she did not expect. He said you would not come back. She did not understand. I am sorry, she said. If you go down the road tonight, Silas said you would not come back. Not this winter, not next spring, not ever. You would mean to. You would tell yourself in Denver that you would write us a letter when you were safe. You would mean it, but the road runs one way for a woman like you, Amelia. East, always east, back toward the people who hurt you, because hurt is a country a person knows the map of, and a country a person knows that the map of is the country a person ends up walking back into when they have run out of strength. I have seen it happen. I have seen it happen to a woman I loved more than my own breath, and she did not even try to leave. She only waited, and the country still came and got her. I will not put you back on that road tonight to save myself a trouble. I would rather have the trouble. The cabin was very quiet for a long moment. Outside, the wind moved. Amelia spoke, and her voice was steady, though it cost her to keep it steady. Who, she said, was the woman? Silas held her eyes. Her name was Evelina Parker, he said. She was to be my wife 6 years ago. She was 23 when Augustus Beaumont had her killed. He wanted my father's silver claim. He could not buy my father, and he could not buy me, so he took the thing he could take. There was no proof that would stand in a Denver court because the men who could have stood as proof had been bought before any of us thought to ask them. Beaumont walked out of that court a free man 6 years ago. He has been a free man every day since. The fire popped. Amelia drew a slow breath. So when my letter came, she said, I read your letter many times before I answered, said Silas. I sat at this table where we are sitting now, and I went over it line by line, and then I went over it again. I told myself I had no business answering. I told myself I had no right to bring a woman up onto this mountain when there was a man down in Denver who had killed the last one. I told myself a great many sensible things, and then I answered the letter anyway. Why, she said. Silas was quiet for a long time before he answered her. When he spoke, his voice had gone lower than she had heard it go, yet low and rough, the voice of a man speaking past a thing in his throat. Because in the 7th paragraph of your first letter, he said you wrote a single sentence about your mother's pearl earrings and the way she used to put them on for the Christmas service, even though she did not believe a word the preacher said, and the way she would put her cold hand on your cold hand in the pew and squeeze it once, and you said you still have the earrings and you would carry them with you wherever you went. I read that sentence until I had it by heart. I knew somewhere around the 40th reading that I was going to answer. I was only delaying so I could pretend it was a decision. Amelia did not speak. She could not speak. She rose from the table very slowly, and she crossed the great room, and she went down the hallway, and she closed the door of her small room behind her, and she stood with her back against the door, and she pressed both hands flat to the wood, and she let one breath out, and the breath came out steady because she had taught it to come out steady a long time ago, and the teaching had held. But she stood there for a long time. After a while, she crossed to the desk. She sat down. She drew the small leather book of poems toward her. She opened the inside cover. She read again the line in the careful hand. For the woman who comes to the mountain. Some words travel better in company. E.C. She closed the book. She set her hand flat upon it. She closed her eyes. She thought of Boston. She thought of the green shutters. She thought of the carved umbrella handle and the bruise that had bloomed yellow along her temple. She thought of Augustus Beaumont's soft, pale hand on her wrist at the dinner table. She thought of her mother's pearl earrings tucked in the toe of her boot through 3 trains and 4 wagons and 1 stagecoach, and of the moment very late at night in a roadside inn outside St. Louis, when she had taken them out and laid them on her palm under the lamp and looked at them and thought, "You got me this far, Mother. You will get me the rest of the way." She thought of Silas Caldwell at his table reading her letter line by line again and again until he could not delay any more. She thought of Evelina Parker. She drew a piece of paper from the small drawer of the desk. She uncapped the small bottle of ink. She dipped the pen, and she wrote in the careful hand her mother had taught her 2 lines. "I am not going down the road. I am staying. Let him come." She did not address the lines. She did not sign them. She folded the paper once. She rose. She crossed back down the hall and into the great room where the 3 brothers were still sitting where she had left them, and she walked to the wing plank table, and she set the folded paper down in the middle of it, and she did not say anything. And she went back down the hall to her room, and she closed the door, and she slid the bolt. Behind her in the great room, none of the brothers moved at first. After a long, quiet moment, Silas reached out and unfolded the paper. He read it. He passed it without a word to Wyatt. Wyatt read it. He passed it to Ezra. Ezra read it. Ezra refolded the paper very carefully along the original crease. He laid it back in the middle of the table in the exact place Amelia had laid it. Then he stood up and he walked to the bench by the door, and he picked up his fiddle and he tucked it under his chin, and he played very softly a slow old air their mother had taught him when he was a boy, an air about a long road and a far house and a light in a window. He played it once through. He stopped. He set the fiddle down. "A Caldwell keeps his word," Ezra said quietly. "So does a Whitfield," said Wyatt, looking at the folded paper on the table. "So it would seem," said Silas. Outside, far above the high peaks, a thin white line of cloud was moving down out of the north. The kind of cloud Silas had taught Amelia to read on the 3rd morning. The kind of cloud that meant cold weather. The first kind, the kind that brought the killing frost. But behind it, very far back, banked along the rim of the sky like a slow-gathering animal, lay the second kind of cloud, the rounder kind, the kind piled like pulled wool, the kind that brought the snow. It was 9 days out yet, maybe 10, but it was coming. And down in Silver Pine, in the lamp-lit back room of the saloon, a man in a dark Eastern coat counted out 3 more pieces of gold onto a worn green felt table and slid them across to a thin man with greasy hair and a missing front tooth, and asked very softly in the careful Boston accent that did not belong within 500 miles of where he sat, one final question. "How many men," said Augustus Beaumont, "can you bring me by the time the snow closes the road?" "5," said the thin man. "Bring me 8," said Augustus Beaumont, and laid down 2 more pieces of gold. The thin man looked at the gold a long moment. Then he reached out his hand and took it. The snow came on a Friday. It came the way the second kind of weather always comes in the high country. It came slow at first in single quiet flakes that drifted down through the still afternoon air and lay on the porch boards a moment and were gone. By dusk, the flakes were thicker. By full dark, the wind had risen, and the snow was coming sideways out of the north. And Wyatt, standing on the porch with a lantern in his hand and his hat pulled low, looked up into the black sky and said one quiet word. Now he said, inside the cabin, the great hearth burned high. Silas had brought in 3 armloads of split pine and stacked them against the inside wall by the stones. Ezra had filled the iron kettle and the 2 big copper pots with water from the well and set them in a row along the hearth bench. Amelia had taken every candle and every lantern down from the shelves and trimmed the wicks and refilled the wells with kerosene from the small brown jug in the pantry. They worked without speaking much, the 4 of them, with the ease of a household that had already learned the shape of one another in 11 days. And outside the wind rose and the snow rose, and the long bowl of Hawk's Hollow began to fill up with the white silence that Wyatt had warned her of. By morning, the world was gone. Amelia rose in the gray dark and pulled her wool wrap around her shoulders and went out into the great room. The window beside the hearth was a square of soft white nothing. She crossed to it. She put her palm flat against the cold glass. There was no horizon. There were no trees. There was no fence line. There was only the slow turning curtain of snow and the muffled sound of wind that came from no direction because it came from every direction. And somewhere far above the low, long groan of a cabin roof, carrying a great deal more weight than it had carried at sundown. The fire was high. Silas had been up. He was always up before her now. She turned and saw him at the long plank table with the coffee cup at his elbow and a piece of harness in his hands that he was not really mending, and he looked at her in the gray firelight, and he said quietly, "The road is closed." She knew what he meant. She crossed to the table and she sat down across from him. She set her hands flat on the wood. She made her voice the steady voice she had practiced. "How many days?" she said. "Until the road opens again." "Until the road opens again." "5," he said. "If the wind dies tonight and the sky clears tomorrow and the temperature does not fall too far." "7 more likely. 10 if the second storm comes in behind this one, which it sometimes does. And if he is already on the road," she said. Silas met her eyes. "If he is already on the road," he said, "then he will be on the road when the storm hits, and the road will deal with him before we have to. The road has dealt with better men than him." Amelia thought about that for a long moment. She thought of Augustus Beaumont in his clean dark coat on the back of a livery horse riding up a wagon track he had never seen in a country he did not know, into the teeth of a storm he had no map for. She thought she ought to feel something at that picture. Pity, perhaps, or satisfaction. She found that she did not feel either. She found she felt only the small, clean, cold feeling of a woman who has finally laid down a thing she has been carrying for too long. "He will not have come up alone," she said. "No, ma'am," said Silas. "He will not." "Then if the road has dealt with one of them, it will have dealt with all of them." "Most likely," said Silas. "But not certainly." "Not certainly," he said. Wyatt came in then from the back porch with snow on his shoulders and his eyebrows white. He stamped his boots in the doorway. He hung his coat on the peg. He poured himself a cup of coffee. He sat down at the head of the table and he said, "The sheep are in, the cattle are in, the horses are in. Smoke is restless. She knows there is something out there she does not like. The other horses are quiet, so I am inclined to think Smoke is reading the wind and not a man." "But you do not know," said Silas. "I do not know," said Wyatt. "Then we will assume she is reading it a man," said Silas. Wyatt nodded once. Outside, the wind shifted half a point, and the snow came harder against the glass. The first day of the storm passed slowly. Ezra cooked. Wyatt cleaned the rifles, all 4 of them, on the long plank table with the slow, careful hands of a man who was making the work last. Silas sat in the deep armchair by the hearth with the book of Whitman's poems open on his knee, but Amelia, watching him from the rocking chair, could see that he was not reading. He was listening. He was listening to the wind. He was listening to the cabin. He was listening to the small, distant restlessness of Smoke in her stall in the barn. He was listening for a thing he had not yet heard, and he was waiting to hear it. Amelia mended. She mended a tear in the elbow of Ezra's gray shirt. She mended the loose binding on the cuff of Silas's good coat. She darned a heavy wool sock of Wyatt's sitting close to the hearth with her thread on her knee, And Wyatt, when she handed it back to him in the late afternoon, turned it in his rough hands for a long, quiet moment. And then he looked at her and he said, "You have a careful hand, ma'am." And Amelia understood again that the words coming out of this brother's mouth were not the words inside his chest, and that the words inside his chest were larger and quieter and would never come out at all, because that was the way he had been built. Toward dusk on the first day, Ezra went out to the barn to break the ice on the water troughs. He came back 20 minutes later. He came in slowly in a way that was not Ezra's way, and the brothers both stood up from where they were sitting, and Amelia rose from her chair because the way Ezra came in told all three of them at once that something had changed. "There is a track," said Ezra. He set a small bundle on the table. It was a rolled neckerchief. He unrolled it carefully. Inside lay a single short length of cigarette paper, half burned, the unburned end black with damp. He laid it on the wood. "Where?" said Wyatt. "Inside the lower gate," said Ezra, "about 30 paces in from the road." The snow had drifted in over most of it, but the wind shifted in the last hour, and a piece of the drift came off, and I saw the print of a boot. Not one of ours, smaller foot than any of us, city boot. The sole was smooth. There was no nail pattern. He came in on foot. He came in within the last day. The cigarette paper was inside the print where he had dropped it. So said Silas. "So one of them is already on this side of the third creek crossing," said Ezra. "He came up on foot before the storm closed the road. He is in the country now. He is between us and the road out." "Where would he be?" said Wyatt. Ezra did not answer right away. He looked at the cigarette paper. He thought, "The line shack," he said. "The line shack," said Silas very quietly. "What is the line shack?" said Amelia. "It is a shed," said Silas, 2 miles down the south fence line. "We use it for haying in the summer and for cattle in the bad weather. It is small. It has a little iron stove. It has a roof that does not leak. A man who has been in this country could walk to it from the lower gate in an hour, even in this snow. A man who has been told where it is by someone in Silver Pine could find it." "Riley," said Wyatt very low. Silas did not answer. "We do not know that," said Ezra. "We do not know that," agreed Silas, "but it is the shack. He is in the shack. He is staying out of the storm, and he is waiting for something. He did not come up here to in a snowdrift. He came up here to do a job. He is waiting for the job." "The job," said Amelia. The three brothers turned to look at her. She was standing very straight, and her hands were folded very tight in front of her, and her voice was level. "The job," she said again. "He is in the shack, and he is waiting to do a job. Tell me what the job is." Silas did not look away from her. "He was not sent up here to bring you back," he said. She had known. She had known since the moment Wyatt had stamped the snow off his boots in the doorway 11 days ago and read her the telegram from Mrs. Holloway. She had known in the small bones of her wrists. But knowing a thing in the small bones of the wrists and hearing it spoken at a long plank table in the gray light of a stormy afternoon were not the same kind of knowing. And she felt the second kind move through her, now the way cold water moves through a cup. Augustus Beaumont said Silas has a habit of cleaning up things he has paid for and not received. He does not like loose accounts. He has done this before. We have reason to think he has done it more than once. The man in the shack was not sent to bring you home, ma'am. He was sent to make sure you do not go home. He was sent to make sure no one ever sees you again." Amelia did not move. The fire shifted in the hearth. Outside, the wind moved. "I see," she said. She sat down. She sat down because her knees had decided without consulting her that they would prefer to be sitting. She placed her hands flat on the table on either side of the cigarette paper. She looked at the small, burnt scrap of it for a long moment, and she thought of the soft, pale hand of Augustus Beaumont on her wrist at her uncle's dinner table. And she thought of the way he had smiled at her after he laid his hand there, the smile that did not reach his eyes. And she understood that the smile she had seen at that dinner table 11 months ago, in the cigarette paper now lying on this plank table 1,100 miles to the west, were the same thing, the same exact thing. The slow, patient hand of a man who did not stop reaching until the thing he reached for was either his or destroyed. She lifted her eyes. She looked at Silas. "What do we do?" she said. Silas did not answer right away. He looked at his brothers. Wyatt spoke first. "We go and get him," said Wyatt. "We do not," said Silas. "We do," said Wyatt. "Silas, he is 2 miles down our own south line. He came onto our land. He is sitting in our shack, burning our wood, waiting for a chance at our kin. We do not sit in this cabin and let him have his weather and his rest. We go and we get him before the storm breaks and before the others come up the road behind him. If we go," said Silas, "then we leave Amelia and Ezra in the cabin with no one who can reach them in time. If a second man is out there we have not seen." "Then I go alone," said Wyatt. "Then you do not come back," said Silas. The brothers looked at each other across the table for a long, quiet moment. Amelia spoke. "I will go with him," she said. All three brothers turned to look at her at once. She kept her voice level. "You do not need to keep me in the cabin," she said. "I can shoot. My father taught me on a small chestnut gelding's back when I was 12 years old with his old cap and ball pistol, and he made me shoot at tin cans on the rail fence until I could hit them 7 of 9. I have not held a pistol in 11 years. But the hand remembers, and I have walked in winter. I have walked across Boston Common in February with snow over my boots when I was 16, because the streetcar would not run. I am not a horse to be kept in a stall, Silas. I am a person, and the person Augustus Beaumont sent a man to kill is me, not you, and I will not sit in this cabin while you ride out in a storm to settle my account." Silas looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "You will not go to the shack." I said I would go with him. "You will not go to the shack," he said again. "Listen to me. I am not telling you to stay because you are a woman. I am telling you to stay because you are the thing he wants. If you go down the south line with Wyatt, and there is a second man we have not seen, and that second man circles behind us, then the thing he wants is in the open country with no roof and no walls. Here in the cabin, you have stone walls a foot thick and a door we can bar, and 3 rifles between you and any man who comes up the porch. You stay because you staying is the strongest place to put you, not because you are weak, because you are valuable." He met her eyes. "Do you understand me?" he said. She did. She understood him entirely. She understood him with a sharp, clean understanding that had nothing in it of being managed and everything in it of being respected. And she nodded once. "I understand you," she said. Wyatt said, "Silas." "I will go," said Wyatt. "I will go with you," said Silas. "Ezra stays," said Wyatt. "Ezra stays," said Silas. Ezra, who had not spoken since he had laid the cigarette paper on the table, looked at his 2 brothers for a long moment with his quiet dawn blue eyes. "Bring him back alive if you can," he said. "We will try," said Silas. "If you cannot," said Ezra, "then bring him back anyway." Silas nodded once. The 2 brothers gathered their gear in a careful, unhurried way that told Amelia more than anything they had said that this was not the first time they had done this work. Silas pulled on his heavy, oiled coat. He buckled a wide leather belt over it. He slid a long-bladed knife into the sheath at his hip. He took down from the wall above the hearth a long, octagonal-barreled rifle with a worn walnut stock, and he loaded it and he laid it across his shoulder. Wyatt did the same with a shorter lever rifle and a pistol at his belt. They each tied a heavy wool muffler around the lower half of their faces. They each pulled their hats down low. They each bent and tied a length of soft leather cord around the tops of their boots to keep the snow out, and Amelia watched them, and she thought of her father putting on his Sunday coat in the hall in Boston, and the way he had always paused with his hand on the doorknob to look back into the parlor at her mother and to nod once before he stepped out. Silas paused at the door now in exactly the same way. He looked across the room at her. He did not speak. He nodded once. Then he was through the door, and Wyatt was through behind him, and the door shut, and the latch fell, and the cabin held its warm yellow square of light, and outside the storm took the 2 brothers, and they were gone into the white. For a long time after they had gone, Amelia and Ezra did not speak. Ezra crossed to the door. He slid the heavy oak bar down across the brackets. He checked the bar. He went to each window of the cabin in turn, and he closed the inner shutters, and he latched them. The cabin grew darker as he worked. By the time he came back to the great room, the only light came from the fire in the great hearth, and from the two oil lamps on the plank table, and the cabin felt smaller than it had felt before, and warmer and more like a thing that was holding them inside it on purpose. Ezra sat down across from her. He laid a small carbine across his knees. He did not put his hands on it. He laid it across his knees and rested his hands on the wooden arms of the chair, and he sat very still, and he listened. "Tell me," said Amelia after a while, "what we do if they do not come back by dark." Ezra looked at her. "We do nothing," he said. "We wait. They will come back. If they do not come back by dark, then we wait through the night. If they do not come back by dawn, then I send up a smoke signal off the chimney with green pine, which Hank Riley will see from his place, if his weather is clear, and Riley will ride for the marshal at Durango, regardless of his own road. But it will not come to that. They will come back." "How do you know?" Ezra almost smiled. The same small, almost smile his oldest brother wore. The Caldwell smile she was beginning to understand was a thing that lived behind the face of every one of these brothers and only came out the smallest possible distance, and it was the more precious for it. "Because," said Ezra, "my brothers have walked out of this cabin in worse weather than this, against worse men than this one, and they have come back every time. It is not pride to say so. It is only the count of the years." Amelia let out a slow breath. She looked at the closed shutters. She listened to the wind. She listened beneath the wind to the small steady sound of the kettle on the hearth crane, and to the low pop of the fire, and to her own heartbeat, which was steadier than she had thought her heartbeat could be on an afternoon like this one. "Ezra," she said. "Ma'am, Amelia." "Amelia," he said. "The bird on the mantel," she said. "Ma'am, you carved it when you were 12. "Yes. What is it?" He looked at the small carved wooden bird on the mantel above the great hearth. He looked at it for a long, quiet moment, the way a man looks at a thing he has not really looked at in a long time because it has been there too long. "It is a winter wren," he said. "We had a pair of them in the eaves of the cabin the winter our mother died. They sang in the cold mornings. She liked them. She used to sit on the porch in her chair even when she could barely sit up at the end, and she would listen for them, and she would smile when she heard them. After she was gone, I carved that one out of a piece of cottonwood, so that there would always be a wren on this hearth." Amelia did not speak. She looked at the small carved bird, and she thought of her own mother in the lavender soap, in the cold hand on her cold hand, in the pew on Christmas morning, in the pearl earrings in the toe of her boot. And she thought how strange it was that on the worst afternoon of her life, with two men out in a storm, hunting a third man who had come to kill her, she should be sitting in a warm room with a quiet brother who had carved a bird for his dead mother, and how somehow the bird and the soap and the pearl earrings were all part of the same quiet thing. And the quiet thing was the only thing in the end that could hold a person up against a country like this. "I had a brooch of my mother's," she said, "a small gold cameo. I left it in Boston. I could not find it in time. He had taken it. My uncle. He had taken many of her things. I have her pearl earrings. They are upstairs in my carpet bag. I have not put them on since she died. I think I have been waiting for a Christmas service that was the right Christmas service. I do not know if I will ever find one. You will," said Ezra. "How do you know?" He looked at her for a long moment with his quiet dawn blue eyes. "Because he said you came here." The fire shifted. Outside, the wind moved. The afternoon went toward dusk. The storm did not break. The snow came on in slow, thick curtains that pressed against the cabin and softened every sound so that the world beyond the inner shutters seemed not to exist at all, and the cabin became a small, bright room held up out of nothing by a fire and a kettle and two people sitting in chairs. Then very far away on the very edge of hearing came a sound. It was a single sharp report muffled by snow, swallowed almost entirely by the wind, but carried through the cabin walls by the deep stones of the foundation. The way the bones of a house carry sounds, the air does not. It was a rifle. Ezra was already on his feet. He moved to the door. He laid his palm flat against the oak bar. He listened. Amelia rose. She crossed the room. She stood beside him. She did not speak. They stood like that for a long minute listening. A second report came, closer this time, or it sounded closer. In a snowstorm, the ear cannot quite tell. It sounded as though it had come from the south fence line. It sounded as though it had come from the country between the cabin and the line shack. A third report, different, a different gun, a pistol maybe, or a different rifle. Ezra closed his eyes for one heartbeat. Amelia could see him counting. She could see him reading the gunfire the way Silas had taught her to read the sky. That is two of theirs, he said quietly, and one of ours. There were two of them, said Amelia. There were two of them, said Ezra. A fourth report. Silence. A long silence. A long, long silence while the wind moved against the shutters and the kettle ticked on the hearth crane and the fire shifted in the great stones. Then nothing. Ezra opened his eyes. He turned to Amelia. We wait, he said. She nodded. They went back to the chairs. They did not sit down right away. Ezra crossed to the rack above the kitchen door and took down a second rifle, a heavier one, and brought it to her. He placed it across her knees. He did not make a show of it. He did not say anything about whether she could shoot it. He laid it across her knees the way a man lays a tool in front of another man whom he knows will know how to use it, and he sat down across from her, and he laid his own carbine across his own knees, and they faced each other across the room, with the great hearth between them and the door of the cabin to one side, and they listened. The wind moved. The fire popped. The shutters held. A long time passed. A long, long time, maybe an hour, maybe two. The light at the small chinks of the shutters went from gray to bluer gray to almost black. It is dark, said Amelia at last. Almost dark, said Ezra. The wind shifted then, just a quarter point, just enough that for a moment the snow stopped pressing flat against the front of the cabin and started pressing along the side of it, and in that small change came a sound that did not belong to the storm. Boots on the porch, one pair, heavy, slow. Ezra was on his feet in one motion. He was at the door in two. He laid the muzzle of his carbine alongside the door jamb at the height of a man's chest. He did not lift the bar. He did not call out. He listened. 3 knocks, then a voice, low, tired, familiar. Open up, brother. Ezra closed his eyes for half a second. Then he lifted the heavy oak bar off the brackets, and he set it against the wall, and he opened the door. Wyatt came in. He came in with snow on every inch of him. His muffler had frozen to the lower half of his face. His hat was so packed with snow that Amelia could not at first see the color of it. He stamped his boots in the doorway. He pulled the muffler down. His eyes were tired, and his cheeks were burned dark with the cold, and there was a smear of something darker than the snow along the front of his coat that Amelia chose for the moment not to look at. Behind him, Silas came in. Silas was carrying a man. The man was slumped over Silas's shoulder the way a sack of feed lay slumped over a saddle. He was not moving. His arms hung down. His head hung down. His coat was a dark coat of fine eastern wool, wholly unsuited to a Colorado snowstorm. His boots were small, thin city boots. There was rope around his wrists. Silas crossed to the long plank table. He laid the man down upon it as gently as a man lays a pallet of glass. He stepped back. He pulled off his hat. He set it on the table beside the man's head. He looked at Ezra. He looked at Amelia. His amber eyes were very tired. He is alive, Silas said. He is alive, said Wyatt, and he is going to tell us the rest of what we need to know because we will not have a second one come up our road in the dark. while we do not know what is on the other end of him. Amelia crossed the room slowly. She came to the long plank table. She stopped at the foot of it. She looked at the man lying on the wood. She did not know him. He was a thin man with greasy hair and a missing front tooth. There was blood on his coat and a bandage that Silas or Wyatt had wrapped tight around his upper right arm, and his face was the gray color of a man who had lost more warmth than blood. His eyes were closed. His breath came shallow. She saw no one. He was a hired knife. He was a tool with a price. He was not Augustus Beaumont. Augustus Beaumont was still down the mountain. She lifted her eyes. She looked at Silas. The other one, she said, did not make it back to the shack, said Silas. I see, she said. This one said Wyatt will tell us how many more are at the foot of the road. He will tell us when they were told to come up. He will tell us what the signal is. He will tell us all of it. Or he will not see morning. We will see which one he chooses. Silas pulled out a chair. He sat down at the head of the table. He did not look at the man on the wood. He looked at Amelia. He spoke to her, and only to her, in the same quiet voice he had used in the wagon on the way up the mountain on her first day. Amelia, he said, the man on this table came up our road to do a thing to you. He failed. Before morning, we will know what he came to do, and we will know how many came with him, and we will know what is coming next. You have a right to be in this room while he tells us. You also have a right to walk back down the halls to your own door and close it behind you and not be in this room at all. There is no wrong choice. The choice is yours. She looked down at the thin man on the table. She looked at his closed eyes. She thought of the bruise on her temple. She thought of the soft, pale hand of Augustus Beaumont on her wrist. She thought of Evelina Parker. She drew a slow breath. She pulled out the chair across from Silas. She sat down. She folded her hands on the table in front of her the way her mother had taught her to fold her hands at the dinner table in Boston. I will stay, she said. Outside, the storm pressed against the cabin walls. Inside, the fire shifted. The man on the table groaned and his eyes opened, and he saw in the gray firelight above him the four faces of the people who had every right in the world to ask him every question they were about to ask. His name was Pell, Cyrus Pell. He gave the name in a thin, dry voice that crackled at the edges like old paper held too close to a flame. He gave it without being asked twice. He gave it the way a man gives a thing when he understands in the bones of him that the room he is in does not have any other use for him beyond the things he can give. Wyatt had pulled a chair to the side of the table. He sat with one boot up on the rung of the chair across from him and his hat on his knee, and his eyes never leaving Pell's face. Silas stood at the head of the table with his hands flat on the wood and his amber gaze level. Ezra stood at the foot, the carbine still across his folded arms. Amelia sat where she had sat down, hands folded, face still. You came up out of Silver Pine, said Silas. Yes. You and the other one. Yes. The other one is dead. I figured. You walked in on foot before the storm. Yes. To the line shack. Yes. Who told you about the line shack, said Silas. Pell's eyes moved sideways. They did not want to land on any of the four faces around the table. They settled finally on the rough beam of the ceiling above him. He swallowed. Riley, he said. A small breath went out of Wyatt. It was not loud. It was only the sound of a man hearing a thing he had been afraid he was going to hear. Riley told you for money, said Silas. Riley told the man who paid me, said Pell. I never spoke to Riley. The man who paid me spoke to him. Riley owed gambling debt back in Denver. The man who paid me bought the debt from a banker friend of his 3 weeks ago. Riley was given to understand that the debt would close when he gave up the layout of this place. Riley did not know what for. Riley was told it was a kidnap. Riley is a fool who thought he was getting rich. Where is Riley now? Said Wyatt very quietly. I do not know, said Pell. Last I saw him, he was riding back to his place from town 2 nights ago. He told us where the shack stood and what hours your man rode the south line and where the lower gate could be slipped. He drew us a sketch on the back of a saloon receipt. Then he got on his horse and rode home. He did not come up the road with us. He did not have the stomach for it. Silas looked at Wyatt. Wyatt looked back at Silas. A silent thing passed between them that Amelia did not entirely follow, but that she understood the shape of the way a person can understand the shape of a sentence in a language she does not speak. Riley would be dealt with, but not tonight. Tonight there were larger things on the table. The man who paid you, said Silas. Augustus Beaumont, said Pell. Where is he now? He is at the foot of the road, said Pell. He is at the Third Creek crossing. He has a tent. He has 6 men with him. Mr. Beaumont himself, 2 riders he brought from Denver, and 4 hands he hired out of the saloon at Silver Pine. He is waiting on the storm to break. He told us if we made the shack and the storm came in behind us, we were to wait it out. If we did not hear from him in 3 days, we were to come down, find the cabin, and finish the work. If we heard from him, we were to come down and meet him at the lower gate and ride up together. Hear from him how, said Ezra. 3 rifle shots, said Pell, spaced even, from the foot of the road. We were to answer with 2, from the line shack. That would be the signal. Amelia listened to all of this with her hands folded on the table in front of her and her face very still. She was making a thing inside her chest that she could feel building like the first bricks of a wall going up. She was not yet sure what the wall was for. She knew only that she was building it and that every word out of Cyrus Pell's mouth was another brick. The work, she said. It was the first time she had spoken since Pell had opened his eyes. Pell looked at her then. He looked at her for the first time in full, and his thin, dirty face went through a small, fast change as he saw her, the change of a man understanding that the woman across the table was not the woman who had been described to him in a back room in Silver Pine. He had been told a story about a runaway. He was looking now at a woman who had folded her hands the way her mother had taught her at a dinner table in Boston, and who was waiting for him to use a particular word so that she could hear it from his own mouth and put it where it belonged. The work, she said again, to make sure, said Pell, that you did not go home. She did not blink. To make sure, she said, that I did not exist. Pell did not answer. He did not need to. Silas spoke, and his voice was quieter than it had been. When was the last contact, he said. This morning, said Pell, just before dawn. We were to go to the shack and stay until the storm cleared. We were to listen for the 3 shots. The 3 shots have not come. They will not come tonight, said Wyatt. No, said Pell. Wyatt and Silas exchanged another silent look across the table. Then Silas straightened up. He took off his coat. He hung it on the peg by the door. He came back to the table and he sat down at the head of it. Cyrus Pell, he said. Pell looked up at him. You will tell us, said Silas, when you were last fed. You will tell us where you were hit and how bad. Ezra will look at the wound. We are not going to let you die tonight if we do not have to. You will sleep where we put you. You will make no noise. In the morning when the storm is done, we will decide what to do with you. You may believe me when I say that what we decide depends entirely on whether anything else you have said tonight turns out to be a lie. Do you hear me? I hear you, said Pell. Then we are done, said Silas. Ezra moved forward without another word. He cut the rope on Pell's wrists, retied them looser in front of him, peeled back the bandage on the upper right arm with the careful small hands of a man who had treated a great many wounds in his life. Pell hissed once and then went silent. Ezra cleaned the wound with hot water from the kettle and a clean square of linen. He packed it with a poultice of something out of a small clay jar. Amelia had not seen him open before, something that smelled of yarrow and pine resin. He bandaged it again clean. Pell said nothing throughout. When Ezra was done, Wyatt and Silas lifted Pell off the table and laid him down on the plank floor of the great room on a folded wool blanket with his back to the long plank table and his face to the hearth so that they could see him at all times. They tied his ankles. They left his bound hands in front of him so that he could shift if he needed to. Then the 3 brothers stood together at the long table, and they looked at one another, and Amelia understood that the next part of the night belonged to her as much as to any of them. They sat down again. The four of them, the same four faces in the same arrangement. The hearth at one end and the door at the other. 6 men, said Wyatt. And Beaumont, said Silas. 8, said Wyatt, counting Pell. 7, said Silas, since one is dead and one is bound on our floor. 7, said Wyatt, that we know of. A silence. The third crossing is impassable for at least 3 days, said Ezra. Maybe 5. The storm has not even broken. Then we have at least 3 days, said Silas, and possibly a week before any of those men come up this road. And by the time they come, the marshal at Durango will be coming up with them. He turned to Ezra. In the morning, said Silas, when the storm breaks, you will ride for Riley's place. You will not ride to Riley. You will ride past Riley to the next homestead, the tenant place. From the tenant place, a rider goes for Durango on the first clear day. The rider tells the marshal that Augustus Beaumont and 6 men are camped at the Third Creek crossing on the road to Hawks Hollow with the intent of coming up the road to commit murder. The rider tells the marshal that the Caldwell brothers have one of the 8 in custody and will surrender him with sworn testimony when the marshal reaches the third crossing. The rider tells the marshal that Riley has been bought. Then the rider stays at the tenant place and waits for the marshal to come back. Do you understand me, Ezra? I understand you, said Ezra. We are not going to ride out to meet Beaumont at the foot of the road, Silas said, looking now at Wyatt. We are not going to give him an open country fight he chose. We are going to keep him on his side of the third crossing until the marshal comes up behind him with a federal badge and 7 deputies. Beaumont came up here to do a quiet murder in a shut country. He will not get a quiet murder. He will get a federal warrant. Wyatt looked at his brother for a moment. Then he nodded once. That, he said, is the better fight. Silas turned to Amelia. Amelia, he said. His voice had gone quieter again. I have just made a decision about your safety without putting it to you first. I should have. I am putting it to you now. If you would rather we ride down and end this at the foot of the road, you tell me and I will hear it. But I am asking you to let the law come up. The law took a long time on Evelina. I would like to be a man who waited for the law this time and got the right answer. I would like to give that to her if I can, and I would like to give it to you. Amelia looked at him for a long time. She thought of Evelina Parker, who she had never met, who was 23 when she was killed for a silver claim that had not even been hers, who lay buried on this land somewhere up the slope behind the cabin, who had been the woman the man across the table had loved before her. She thought of her own mother in the pew on a Christmas morning with her cold hand on a cold hand. She thought of her own father at his desk in the long evenings with the green glass lamp. She unfolded her hands. She placed her right hand flat on the table in front of Silas, palm down. Let the law come up, she said. Silas placed his right hand flat over hers. He did not press. He did not grip. He laid his hand on hers the way a man lays a sealing wax stamp on a letter he has decided to send. Then it is decided, he said. The wind moved against the cabin. The fire shifted. The night went on. By morning, the storm had broken. The light came up clean and cold and unforgivingly bright across a country that had been swallowed for a day and a night and given back again, smaller, wider, more itself. Ezra rode out at first light with Whisper under him and a pack horse behind, dressed in 3 layers of wool and his mother's old wide-brimmed hat and a pair of his father's snow goggles cut from a single piece of horn. He carried a sealed letter in a leather pouch under his coat. He did not look back. He came over the lip of the bowl and was gone, a small, dark figure against an enormous white country, and Amelia stood on the porch with Silas beside her and watched until the figure was no figure at all, and there was nothing left but the long, clean line of the snow. He will be at the tenant place by dark, said Silas. He will, she said. The marshal will come up in 3 days, maybe 4. Beaumont will not move in the snow. He will not know until the deputies are on him that the hand he played has been turned. Good, she said. They stood for a long time on the porch in the new morning sun. The eaves dripped. The snow crystals on the dooryard caught the light and threw it back in small, bright pieces. Behind them in the cabin, Pell slept on the plank floor in front of the hearth, and Wyatt sat at the long plank table cleaning a rifle for the fourth time that week, and outside the high white peaks above the bowl of Hooker's Hollow stood against the blue with the quiet authority of mountains that had seen a great many men come and go and had outlasted everyone. Silas turned to her. "Amelia," he said. She looked at him. He took off his hat. He held it in his hands. He looked at the brim of it for a moment, and then he looked up at her with the amber eyes she had seen on her first morning. In the dust of silver pine, the eyes that had been tired then and were still tired now, but had something steadier behind them, the look of a man who had stopped at last being afraid of a thing he had been carrying for 6 years. "When you came up the wagon road," he said, "I told you I had given my word in a letter. I told you the homestead was a place of protection and that you would have a key to your own door. I told you I would pay your way back to Boston if you ever asked. All of that was true. All of it is still true." She waited. "But he said it is not all of it." She waited. "I told you on the wagon road that I read your letter many times before I answered," he said. "What I did not tell you was Waman. I read it because I was afraid of what would happen to me if I answered it. I read it again because I was afraid of what would happen to me if I did not. I am a man who has loved one woman in his life, Amelia, and that woman is buried up the slope behind the cabin under a cottonwood my brothers and I cut down and shaped together. I did not think I would love another. I did not think I had it in me. I did not think the country would let me. I was wrong on every count." He paused. "I am not asking you for an answer this morning," he said. "I am asking you only to know it. The arrangement we made on the wagon road is the arrangement we still have. The key is still yours. The bolt is still yours. The way back to Boston is still yours if you ever want it. None of that changes because I have spoken these words. But I would not have it stand in a house where we may yet have to fight for our lives in 3 days' time that I had not said this much to you. A Caldwell keeps his word, and the truest word I have for you is this one. I love you. I have loved you, I think, since the second letter. Whatever comes of it, you will know. That is all." He set his hat back on his head. He turned to go back inside. "Silas," she said. He stopped. He did not turn around. Amelia stepped forward on the porch boards. She came up beside him. She did not take his hand. She did not take his arm. She stood beside him, and she looked out across the long, clean white bowl of Hawk's Hollow toward the rim where Ezra had disappeared an hour before, and she said in a voice that surprised her with its steadiness the answer she had not known until that moment that she had ready. "I am not going back to Boston," she said. "I think I have known that since the moment you laid the brass key on the desk. I did not say it because I did not yet trust myself to know what I knew. I trust myself now. And when this is done, when the marshal has come up and Augustus Beaumont is in irons and the snow has melted off the cottonwood up the slope, I will marry you in front of a judge in Silver Pine. Not because I owe you a marriage, not because I am paying for my passage, but because I have read your face for 12 days now, and I have learned a thing about it that I would like to keep close for the rest of my life. That is my answer. You did not ask. You should have. I'm giving it anyway." He turned then. He looked at her. The amber of his eyes was very bright in the new sun. He did not speak for a long moment. When he did, his voice was the voice of a man who had not used it for the thing it was now being used for in a great many years. "Amelia," he said. That is all he said. She lifted her hand. She laid it lightly on the front of his coat, over his heart. He laid his hand over hers. They stood like that a long while on the porch of the cabin in Hawk's Hollow, with the long, bright morning ahead of them, and the quiet country around them, and a dangerous man at the foot of the road, and neither of them said anything more because nothing more needed to be said, and the saying of it would have only made it smaller. Inside by the hearth, Cyrus Pell opened one eye and watched them for a moment through the doorway, and then shut it again, and turned his face toward the fire, and let out a breath he had not known he was holding, because Cyrus Pell had ridden up a mountain in the pay of a hard man to do a hard thing, and had been brought down off the mountain alive into a house where two strangers stood together on a porch in the new sun, and Cyrus Pell was a poor man in a hired knife in a small cog in another man's machine. But Cyrus Pell was not yet so far gone that he could not feel the weight of the thing he was watching, and it cost him, and he turned his face away. The marshal came up on the fourth day. He came up with 7 deputies in a snowplow and a heavy wagon, and a federal warrant in a leather case and a face like an old map. He stopped at the Third Creek crossing, as Silas had said he would. He took Augustus Beaumont and his 6 men at first light without firing a shot, because Augustus Beaumont, sitting in a canvas tent at the foot of a Colorado road on the morning the storm broke, did not know yet that the answer to his 3 rifle shots had been a federal badge instead of 2 from the line shack. And by the time he understood what had happened to him, he was lying face down in the snow with a deputy's knee between his shoulder blades and his soft, pale hands behind his back in iron. And the iron did not care about Boston, and the deputy did not care about gold, and the snow on which his face was pressed was not the snow of any country he had ever bought. By the time the marshal rode up the wagon track to Hawks Hollow that afternoon, Augustus Beaumont was bound in a wagon with his 6 hired men, and the marshal had a sworn statement from Cyrus Pell folded in the leather case, and Hank Riley, riding into Silver Pine to drink off a guilty conscience, had been stopped by 2 deputies at the edge of the road and was bound in the wagon next to Beaumont and was crying openly into the rough wool of his own coat. The marshal sat at the long plank table in the cabin at Hawks Hollow and drank a cup of Ezra's coffee and looked across the table at Silas Caldwell, with eyes that had seen a great many bad men and a few good ones. "I have wanted Augustus Beaumont in chains for 9 years," said the marshal. "I have not had the witness. Today I have the witness. Today I have Cyrus Pell signed and sworn. Today I have a man who can put Beaumont's voice in the back room of a saloon paying gold